It started like any ordinary evening. The last light of sunset was spilling across the quiet mountain cabin when Ethan opened the door, exhausted from a long day. But before he could even set his bag down, a shadow moved across the counter. Quick, graceful, familiar. The wild bobcat leapt onto the kitchen counter and then, with a low purr, climbed right into his arms. Her rough paws rested against his chest, her golden eyes soft with recognition. To the world, she was a rescued wild animal, untamed, unpredictable. But to him, she was family. No one believed their bond until they saw it, the way she waited for him every evening, watching from the forest line, as if she always knew when he was near. Before we begin, make sure you hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Ethan had lived alone in the Pine Valley cabin for nearly 4 years. Just him, the cold mountain air, and the silence that came after losing too much, too soon. But everything changed the night he found her. It was late autumn when he first saw the bobcat, thin, shivering, and wounded, crouched near the cabin steps. A storm was rolling through, rain beating down so hard that even the forest seemed to retreat. Ethan remembered setting down his flashlight, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Hey there." Easy. The bobcat didn't growl. She just stared, her amber eyes steady but tired. She was barely more than a shadow, soaked to the bone, trembling with exhaustion. Ethan couldn't just walk away. He went inside, grabbed an old towel and a bit of leftover meat, and placed them near the porch. The animal didn't move for nearly 10 minutes. Then, slowly, she limped forward and curled into the towel, as if she'd been waiting for that warmth all along. Ethan named her Kaya, a name that meant little spirit. For the next few days, he kept his distance. He left food and water outside, and Kaya began to appear every morning at the same time. Within a week, she was waiting on the porch when he opened the door, eyes half closed as if to say, "I know you'll come." By the 3rd week, Kaya had learned Ethan's routine. When he came home from the forest trail where he worked as a ranger, she would already be there, sitting on the porch rail, watching the road, tail flicking lightly. The moment his boots hit the gravel, she would leap down, padding toward him, her body low and graceful, like a wild cat greeting her own. At first, Ethan thought it was coincidence. But soon he realized she could sense his arrival long before his truck turned the corner. Somehow she knew. It wasn't just animal instinct. It was something else, something deeper. Sometimes, when he'd sit by the fire after dinner, Kaya would slip inside through the half-open door, settling near his feet without a sound. She never let him touch her at first, just watched, observed, trusted, slowly. One evening, after a long day of clearing debris on the trail, Ethan came home later than usual. It was already dark, and rain was falling again. He opened the door, dropped his bag, and before he could turn on the lights, something soft brushed against his leg. Kaya. Her paws climbed up his chest, her head pressing gently under his chin. A wild creature giving the only kind of hug she knew. Ethan froze, then whispered, "You missed me, didn't you?" Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, a wild bobcat purred softly in his arms. The days that followed blurred into a quiet rhythm. Man and bobcat, both creatures of habit, learning how to share the same silence. Kaya had claimed the corner of the cabin near the wood stove as her own. Ethan placed a folded wool blanket there one night, and by morning, she was curled upon it, like a small flame in the dim light. He still couldn't quite believe it, that a wild animal would choose to stay near him when she had an entire forest waiting beyond the door. But Kaya was no ordinary bobcat. She began to mirror Ethan's schedule with uncanny precision. When his alarm buzzed just before dawn, she would already be pacing by the window, waiting for him to pour his coffee. When he stepped outside to check the traps or patrol the ridge, she followed at a distance, close enough to watch, far enough to remind him that some boundaries remained sacred. Neighbors began to notice. The mail carrier once caught sight of Kaya perched on the cabin's roofline and joked, "You got yourself a wild roommate there, Ranger." Ethan smiled, but didn't correct him. In a strange way, it felt true. On colder mornings, Kaya grew talkative, not in words, but in small sounds Ethan had learned to read like a second language. A soft chuff when she wanted food. A low rumble when something outside caught her attention. And sometimes a sound that wasn't quite a growl. A breathy vibration that she made only when she was near him. Something halfway between affection and warning, like she was reminding him, "I'm still wild, but I trust you." Ethan had never known such a connection, not even with people. Once, while repairing the fence near the tree line, he heard a strange rustling. He turned and saw Kaya watching from the brush. Beside her, a smaller shape, a tiny spotted kitten barely walking on its own. Ethan froze, heart racing. "You have a little one," he whispered. Kaya blinked slowly, almost proudly, before nudging the kitten forward. The baby wobbled, sniffed the air, and hid behind its mother's leg. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. In that moment, he realized what their strange friendship had led to. Trust enough for a wild mother to reveal her secret. From that day on, Kaya's visits changed. She became cautious again, appearing less often and always keeping her kitten close. Ethan respected the distance, but his mind never stopped wondering, had she brought her young to show him something, or to ask for help? The answer came one stormy night in early March. Rain hammered against the roof, and the valley was swallowed by fog. Ethan was sorting through maps at his desk when he heard it, that familiar scraping sound on the porch. Not a knock, not quite an animal's paw, but something between the two. He stood, heart pounding, and opened the door. Kaya stood there in the downpour, soaked, trembling, and at her feet lay her kitten, limp, motionless. Ethan's breath caught. Kaya looked up at him, eyes wide, pleading without words. "What happened?" he whispered, kneeling down. The kitten let out a faint, broken mewl. Kaya didn't move, didn't flinch. She just waited, her fur plastered to her body, rain dripping from her whiskers. Ethan didn't hesitate. He scooped up the tiny body, cradled it in a towel, and glanced back. Kaya followed him with her eyes but didn't step inside. It was the same look she'd given him months ago. Trust. Fragile, but absolute. "I'll help," he said softly. "I promise." As he shut the door, Kaya stayed on the porch, her silhouette blurred by the storm. Inside the cabin, the fire hissed and cracked as Ethan worked quickly. The tiny kitten's breathing was shallow, its fur matted with mud. He could feel its fragile heartbeat fluttering weakly under his fingers. "Come on, little one," he murmured, wrapping it tighter in the towel. "Stay with me." Kaya's shadow lingered just beyond the window, pacing back and forth in the storm. Each time lightning flashed, he could see her golden eyes, unwavering, desperate. Ethan fetched his medical kit, the same one he used for injured wildlife on the trails. His hands moved automatically, years of training taking over. He cleaned the kitten's wounds, checked its pulse, and used a small syringe to feed it warm glucose water drop by drop. Minutes stretched into an hour. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin time held its breath. When the kitten finally stirred, just a twitch of the paw, a faint mewl, Ethan exhaled in relief. "There you go, little fighter," he whispered. He turned toward the window. Kaya was still there, drenched and silent. Her ears perked at the sound of her kitten's cry. Ethan opened the door halfway. "She's okay," he said softly. "She's breathing." Kaya didn't move closer, but she let out a low, throaty purr, one Ethan had never heard from her before. It was something like gratitude, something like surrender. He set the kitten near the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, and sat beside it through the night. Kaya remained on the porch the entire time, refusing to leave, her presence steady as the storm. By morning, the rain had stopped. Pale light seeped through the clouds. The kitten was sleeping soundly now, its breathing even. When Ethan cracked the door open, Kaya stood waiting, her fur fluffed and glistening with dew. He placed the small bundle outside. Kaya approached slowly, sniffing her kitten, then lifting it gently by the scruff. Before she turned to leave, she paused and looked back at Ethan. That look, that silent exchange, was something he would never forget. It wasn't human language. It didn't need to be. It was trust, raw and pure. Ethan stood at the doorway until the forest swallowed them both. For the next several days, Kaya didn't return. The porch felt empty, and every sound in the woods made Ethan's chest tighten with hope. He went about his duties, but something inside him had changed. The cabin that once felt like solitude now felt like waiting. Then, one clear morning, he heard the familiar sound, soft paws on the gravel path. He turned, and there she was. Kaya stood at the tree line, her fur gleaming in the sunlight. But this time she wasn't alone. Beside her, the kitten, now walking unsteadily, head high, following close behind. Ethan smiled, heart swelling. "You did it," he whispered. Kaya stepped forward, eyes locked on his. She didn't come close, but she didn't retreat either. Then, in one small motion, she lowered her head, a gesture so brief he might have imagined it. A thank you. And then, just as silently as she had come, Kaya turned back toward the forest, her kitten bounding beside her through the tall grass. Ethan stood there long after they disappeared, the sound of the wind whispering through the trees like an echo of her purr. That night, for the first time in years, he slept with the cabin door slightly open, just in case she ever needed him again. Weeks passed. Spring began to thaw the edges of the mountain valley. Snow melted into silver streams that wove between the pines, and the forest seemed to breathe again. Ethan had returned to his usual ranger duties, clearing the trails, checking on the wildlife rehabilitation site a few miles north. But nothing about life felt usual anymore. Each time the wind rustled through the trees or a shadow moved near the clearing, he found himself turning instinctively, half hoping, half fearing that Kaya would be there. And often, she was. Sometimes he'd spot her just at the edge of the ridge, standing still against the golden light, her kitten, now bolder and stronger, playing near her paws. Other times he'd catch her reflection in the creek as she followed him from afar. She never came close again. But she didn't have to. Their connection had moved beyond proximity. It became a rhythm of trust, quiet, unseen, yet constant. One afternoon, while repairing a fence along the lower trail, Ethan heard a faint chirp. He turned and saw the Bobcat kitten perched on a rock, watching him. Its ears flicked curiously as if trying to mimic Kaya's cautious grace. "Well, look who's growing up fast," Ethan smiled, setting down his hammer. The kitten tilted its head and let out a sound somewhere between a purr and a squeak. Ethan laughed softly. "You sound just like your mom." Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the little one bounded off into the brush, vanishing like a ripple in water. That night, Ethan jotted the encounter in his field journal. March 28th, Kaya's offspring healthy, mobile, and thriving. Observed play behavior. Mother unseen but likely nearby. He hesitated before writing the next line. Strange sense of gratitude. Hard to define. Days turned into months. The forest grew greener, and the bond that had begun in a storm evolved into something sacred. Kaya no longer lingered near the cabin, but her presence was everywhere. Paw prints by the stream, the faint scent of her musk on the wind, and sometimes the echo of her chuffing call at dusk. Then, one evening in early summer as Ethan returned from patrol, he noticed something unusual. A small, weathered branch had been placed across his porch steps, perfectly centered, unmoved by the wind. Beneath it, a cluster of feathers. At first he thought it was coincidence, but the next day there was another, a stone, smooth and round, lying exactly where he always left Kaya's food. He smiled. So you still remember. It wasn't a gift in the human sense, not gratitude as people understood it. It was instinct, gesture, acknowledgement. A wild thank you, left in symbols only the forest could teach. From that day on, the offerings continued, sometimes feathers, sometimes flowers, always placed where Kaya used to sit. And each time Ethan found one, he felt that quiet reminder that even the wild remembers kindness. Late one night, as he sat by the fire, he thought of that stormy evening months ago. The look in Kaya's eyes, the fragile heartbeat in his hands, the promise he'd made without words. I'll help. He realized then that perhaps Kaya hadn't just trusted him once. Maybe, in her own way. She never stopped. By the time summer reached its height, Ethan's small cabin felt more alive than ever. Birds nested under the eaves, deer wandered near the clearing at dawn, and the nights were filled with the low hum of crickets. Yet even amid all that life, he often caught himself glancing at the porch, half expecting to see a flash of tawny fur or those steady amber eyes watching from the dark. It had been almost 3 months since Kaya's last visit. He told himself she'd moved deeper into the forest, teaching her young one to hunt and survive. Still, a quiet ache lingered, a mix of pride and loneliness only those who've loved something wild could understand. Then one evening, just as the sun slipped below the ridge, Ethan heard the faintest sound, a soft scrape against wood. His heart stopped. He turned toward the porch. Kaya was there, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood the young Bobcat, nearly grown now, its coat sleek and spotted, eyes bright with youth. Kaya looked thinner, her fur rougher from the season's heat. But her presence, calm, commanding, filled the space like the forest itself had stepped forward to greet him. Ethan slowly opened the door, careful not to startle them. "Hey, Kaya," he whispered. She watched him silently, tail twitching once. Then she stepped aside. The younger bobcat padded forward, carrying something in its mouth, a small bundle of dried leaves wrapped around what looked like a pine cone. The animal placed it gently on the porch, then sat back beside its mother. Ethan stared, not breathing. It wasn't just a random find. It was deliberate, intentional. A gift. Kaya blinked slowly, her gaze steady on his, and in that look, Ethan felt it again. That wordless connection that had defined their story from the beginning. He crouched low, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." For a few seconds, the world stood still. The hum of cicadas, the scent of pine, the faint shimmer of twilight filtering through the trees. Then Kaya turned, nudged her young one gently, and together they melted into the forest, their silhouettes vanishing into the gold and green of dusk. Ethan sat on the porch long after they disappeared, the gift resting before him. When he unwrapped it later, he found the pine cone had been gnawed open, its seeds exposed and intact. Life inside life. A message, perhaps, from one protector to another. He placed it on the mantel above the fireplace. It stayed there, gathering dust and memory, a quiet reminder of the night the wild came to trust him. Weeks later, a park biologist named Lena visited for a survey. She was new to the district and curious about the rumors of a ranger who'd befriended a wild bobcat. Ethan smiled when she asked. "Befriended isn't the right word," he said. "She just trusted me once." And I tried not to break that trust. Lena studied him curiously. "You really believe wild animals remember that kind of thing?" He looked out toward the trees, the same direction Kaya had disappeared. "I don't just believe it," he said quietly. "I've seen it." Later that evening, as the biologist drove away, Ethan stood by the porch railing, the wind warm against his face. The forest stretched out before him, endless and alive. Somewhere out there, he knew, Kaya and her young ones still roamed, silent guardians of the mountain, keepers of a promise that neither man nor nature had forgotten. He whispered into the breeze, "Stay safe, little spirit." The wind shifted, carrying through the pines a faint, familiar sound, a single chuff, low and soft, like an echo of thanks. Ethan smiled, because in that sound he didn't just hear goodbye. He heard forever,